In 1932, Mary and Olin Mills started a photography business that would go on to become the nation's studio. In the over 75 years it existed, Olin Mills employed countless thousands of people. Some would only work a short time, while others would launch careers that spanned decades. These employees were part of a company that provided more than just photos. They preserved memories for future generations. They documented the fashion and the trends of the times, and they captured the young faces of those who would inevitably grow old, bringing to each a bit of immortality. These are the stories of the people of Olin Mills.
Hi, I'm Jeff Danner. I was with Olin Mills from 1987 to 1996. I kind of started during some of the, I'll call it the westward expansion. Washington had several studios over in the Seattle area, and they started expanding eastward. And so I came on when they opened the first store in Spokane, Washington. I started prior a month and a half or 2 months before the studio opened. So everybody kind of, even that were hired as studio positions, started working in the TSA group. So I had some TSA and delivery experience. They ended up settling on a different person for a photographer. So from there, I went down to Nampa, Idaho with a photo trainer and by the name of Steve. I can't remember Steve's last name, but was down there for a few weeks and trained in Nampa, Idaho, and came back, and they were getting ready to open up a second store in the Spokane Valley, and so I was kind of slated to take over the photography position there. And let's see, I came back and I worked in TSA and did some other things until the Spokane Valley store opened. Then there was some shuffling around, and I settled in as a photographer and did that for 2 or 3 years as a studio photographer. And there was kind of a changeover at the district level, and Greg Zandy and Kathy Frink and a few others in management came out and took over our district office, and kind of made things much better organized and such. And I eventually became a photo supervisor for Eastern Washington, which was the 2 Spokane stores, Tri-Cities store in Kennewick, and a Yakima store. And then I also did some work off and on in Seattle. We'd have meetings in Seattle or down in Oregon. That was all part of the same district. Did the photography supervisor for several years. That encompassed lots of management trainings and seminars, etc. Went to the Waco facility once for like a photography seminar. Went to Chattanooga once for an HR supervisor training. And went to Springfield once for a big photography training. I think that was when we were rolling out the 108s. And went to Houston for an international conference. I'm trying to remember whether it was just photographers or not, but I remember that I recall kind of meeting up with and befriending a bunch of the photographer supervisors from the UK, and so that was kind of interesting to hang out and share with those guys. And then eventually around 1994, there was another change in the district management, and we started being managed out of Northern California. As part of that, I had also a decent background in computers, so they wanted me to go through the TSA computer training, and we had a big week or 2 weeks in Reno where we trained heavily on the TSA computers, and I was tasked with coming back to Washington and rolling that out. So I kind of focused on TSA for several weeks there, getting the computer system installed and everybody trained up on it. Then I was sent to Seattle and became the area manager of the Seattle area. Seattle was the numbers were dipping quite a bit, and so really it was a lot of cost cutting and kind of consolidation and even stores closing. That was in like 1995. So when things were starting to diminish a bit, and then they decided that area was small enough that they consolidated it with Oregon, and I became a district photo supervisor, and that's how I kind of ended my career in '96 when I left. Was district photo supervisor for Washington and Oregon. Some really good memories. I kind of mentioned hanging out with the UK photographers in Houston that week. That was interesting just to get a different perspective on the photography and the company from their side, and really enjoyed going to Springfield that week, and every time that Bruce Caudell had a chance to come out and work with us in the field. He came out to our area during my tenure probably at least 3 or 4 times, and it was always a great time, always a great learning experience. He was one person that I really enjoyed working with. There was also one time that Kathy Frink was our district photo supervisor at the time. We decided that we were going to try to build up business. There was some considered expansion into Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So the Spokane Valley studio was not that far from the Washington-Oregon state line. So we decided that we would take equipment from the Valley studio and do a promotion in the mall in Coeur d'Alene to try to tease business and just get our name out there in the Coeur d'Alene area. And so we set up a whole booth in the mall for a weekend, and we had props, and we had people come in, and we actually we had a full camera set up in the mall, open air. It was pretty cool. So we did different prompts. We talked to people. We gave out 8x10 free 8x10 coupons, etc., free sitting coupons. Did all that schmoozing and such, and I don't know, that was just a pretty cool experience. And in fact, one of the kids' photos that I took, I ended up actually submitting for a top notch, and that's what actually got me my top notch award. Was from that sitting in the mall. Following on that, I guess what we ended up doing, so we used the spare camera equipment that we always kept to support our area since we were so remote, to set up the studio. But then we ended up having to order, I think the church division background rollers is how we ended up setting up the studio in the mall. Yeah, it was kind of an innovative thing. We hadn't heard of, other than the church division, traveling. We hadn't heard of anybody doing anything in a mall like that. I kind of had 2 loves going into starting out with Olin Mills. I had 2 loves. I liked computers, and I liked photography. And so I decided this was an opportunity to try out my photography love. I had been a photographer for years, in high school and such, and doing weddings and senior portraits and things on the side for friends and that. So I got into that. I loved the photography aspect. I loved working with the people, and I found that I really loved working with training other photographers, teaching them, the lighting techniques, and trying to pass down that knowledge and such. In our area, I was kind of known to be a volume photographer, and I kind of took pride in that I could still get a decent amount of quality and shoot. I don't even remember what my record was now that's been so long, but I know that it was in the high hundreds. We might have even broken 200 sittings in a week on a few occasions. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed learning. I enjoyed working with my district photo supervisor, Kathy. I loved, working with with Bruce and whenever those guys came out, I kind of sucked up as much knowledge as I could from those people when I worked with them, and I tried to pass that down to the photographers that I worked with, and that was kind of the best times that I recall from my time there. You know, the pay could have been better, but you know, it was a high volume business, and it was a great starting point for life. So I know that from the photography side, we were really trying to change with the times a little more in those late 80s, early 90s. You know, when I started, late 80s, it was all very much just backgrounds to the floor, and then you had the kids table, and that was, you know, originally it was just the old plywood tables with the steel pipe legs, and then we finally moved to the big heavy, you know, steel table that had the baby insert in it and everything, and so that helped. And then focused a little more on being able to do more full-length photography. We worked out some techniques where we could put in this melamite floor that was white and tape the seam, and then, you know, flip the white background over so it hung just a little bit longer, and then you could pull it down and tuck it under there, and when you backlit that, you basically had a full white seamless background, floor to ceiling. There were some studios that also had gotten the big canvas, it was like light canvas, cotton, kind of a gray background that you could then backlight, and that you could pull out and do full lengths on. So that was some of the biggest changes. Also the change, and I don't recall the model number or how it was referred to, but the original older camera that was, I think it was technically considered a medium format, larger negative, very much mechanical, apertures, etc. And then switching from that to the 108, where you had the remote monitor, the remote cord, the remote that you could tilt and pan and zoom in and zoom out, etc., and totally control the camera. It was a big departure, I recall, when that rolled out, photographers, but especially if you were dealing with, well, if you were a volume photographer, you could, you know, the cameras, you could rip along, but, you know, stopping and flipping from horizontal to vertical, and, you know, having to look through the viewfinder and focus, etc. You could really clip along. Yeah, it took a little longer to zoom in, zoom out than it took with the old cameras, but you got to where you could do that thing behind your back, and you could still be walking and setting lights as you're framing a shot, and it was amazing for multitasking. My biggest influencers, I think, from learning how to be a good manager, professionalism, etc. Greg Zandy was our district manager as I was moving up into supervision, and he was just a great example of how to be a good boss. And part of his team, Kathy Frank, who came in, she was our photo supervisor. She'd come up from the Tampa St. Pete area and had moved out to Washington and really got things. We didn't have a lot of guidance prior to her, and she was a great resource. And with her coming out, they helped to get Bruce Caudill to come out as much as they could to work with us, either as area meetings or traveling roadshow. There's a couple of times I recall being working the road with Bruce as we were traveling from studio to studio. So we hit some Oregon, hit some Seattle area, and then would just kind of go out up and down I-5 and work with different photographers and in small groups. It was a great time. And then the photo support people that we worked with in Waco, I had a great relationship with them, and they were Will and Peggy and Robert. Those guys were always great to work with. As a younger guy starting out in life and before I got married and got into the reality, I think it was a great starting point, especially moving into a supervisory position. I learned how to manage and work with lots of different kinds of people, which has helped so much in life, dealing with relationships, different kinds of bosses, different kinds of coworkers, et cetera. The things you have to deal with in life makes you much more flexible, especially, dealing with the public coming through your camera room. You're dealing with all sorts of different ages and personalities and such. And I think that helped me greatly kind of come out of my shell and learn to be a good boss and learn to recognize a good boss and manager and supervisor. I'm appreciative for that time.
Thank you for listening to the People of Olin Mills podcast.